Hey everyone, welcome to the Week 12 lecture, which will help prepare you for your final project. This will be our last lecture, so congratulations everyone. Just to give you a little bit of background in terms of how we want to organize this lecture today, what we're going to do is walk you through a hypothetical presentation / proposal. Adam and I will be playing the part of the agency presenting to this hypothetical client called the Jane Smith Foundation. And what they're looking to do is to use their foundation's $15 million to finally end teen smoking. So what we're going to do in our presentation is give them some very important information about their target audience, their issue environment, and relevant messaging that can all come together to really form a compelling strategy that will get the target audience to hopefully and ultimately end teen smoking for good. So with that, you can consider the rest of our lecture today to actually just be us presenting to you as though you were the Jane Smith Foundation.
Great, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Erica and I are really excited about this opportunity, not just because it's an important effort in tobacco cessation among teens, but it's also a very challenging one. So we look forward to talking to you at the Jane Smith Foundation about really finishing the job of teen smoking. We're going to go through some audience analysis and dive in and give you a sense of what strategy we think is going to help us get to the finish line. We look forward to sharing that with you today. All right, so let's take a look at the challenge. According to recent FDA smoking data, 81% of teens don't smoke. We're only looking at 19% of teens who say they've smoked cigarettes in the past 30 days. If we compare these numbers to 1998, when the Master Settlement Agreement was signed, again, that's the agreement with the state's attorney generals and the tobacco companies after all the lawsuits. At that point, over 36% of teens said they'd smoked in the last 30 days. In actuality, the percentage of youth who say that they smoke has gone down every year between 1997 and 2003. But since then, the decrease in teen smoking has slowed, and the use of some forms of tobacco among teen audiences leveled out. Now again, although these last 14 years represent some amazing progress in tobacco cessation efforts among teens, this presentation is not to celebrate where we've been. It's to chart out a strategy to where we are going, where we can go together to make sure that we can further reduce teen smoking, how we can defeat the 19. Our target audience are going to be the 12 to 17-year-olds who are looking to reduce smoking rates among. So what are our objectives? How do we know that we're going to be on track to defeat the 19? First of all, campaign recognition, we want that to be at 75% of teens by the end of year one. We need to make sure that we have a huge recognition of the campaign before we can really look at reducing smoking rates. By year two, we want to see that the teens who say they're interested in smoking, we want that to be down by 25% off current numbers, and we want to reduce smoking rates among teens to 15% by the end of year two. You'll notice that's only a 4% decrease from where we are now, the 19%. There's good reason for that. We are at the hardest numbers to reduce teen smoking, so we think that a 4% reduction would be a huge step in the right direction, but it's certainly doable, even though it is, some might say, is a modest objective. So let's talk about the context. As we look at tobacco right now, we're beyond the Truth campaign. Erica's going to talk to you a little bit more about that later on. But a 14-year-old these days was born the year the MSA was signed. So unless they're looking at Google Images, they haven't seen Joe Camel or cartoon depictions designed directly to entice them to smoke. There are no sporting event sponsorships. There's no Virginia Slims tennis, no Winston Cup anymore. There's no questions of smoking or non-smoking sections in restaurants, and no smoke-filled teachers' lounges like there were when I was in high school, and certainly all the movies that I would see in high school showed the smoke-filled teachers' lounge. But let's talk a little bit more about the audience perspective, and we did some quick focus groups among the target audience to really get a sense of what they're thinking and feeling. And although these were informal sessions, the most important thing we identified was when you say smoking in general, people don't think smoking cigarettes. They think about smoking weed. It's about marijuana. It's not about cigarettes. Cigarettes are just not top of mind. If we look at some other quotes coming from these groups, there's the sense they feel they want to make a difference, wish that parents had a sense to really understand the stresses that they're going through all the time. But we also notice that there isn't a whole lot of peer pressure today associated with smoking cigarettes. It's easier to say no to cigarettes than it is to drinking. We'll see more data on that in a second. Money is still an issue among teens. There's no real surprise there. But there is an interesting balance of individuality of folks wanting to be their own person, not necessarily be cliquish, but it's all about friends. It's all about hanging out with friends. So how do you walk that fine line of individuality but also needing to fit in? And then, as we talked a little bit already, not only is there no peer pressure about smoking, but it doesn't matter if other folks make that choice. I made the choice not to smoke. Whatever, it's fine. Don't need to worry about other folks who do make a choice. So let's look at some quantitative data as well. These are data from the 2011 Portland Valley Youth Styles data set. We ask teens, these are 12 to 17-year-olds, what makes girls popular, what makes boys popular. And among both sets of batteries of questions, smoking cigarettes is the bottom of the list. It's just not an entree into popularity these days. We also looked at youth styles to get a sense of what traits or words and phrases do teens use to describe themselves. Family-oriented rises to the top of the list. We cannot assume that they don't care about family. What's interesting is we have 73% who say they're leaders, but 91% who say that they're team players. That's that individuality versus trying to fit in, something that we really need to take into account when we understand the mindset and try to change the mindset of this audience. And notice less than 1 in 5 say they're trendsetters.
Great. So given all of that, I want to give you a sense of the mindset of who this teenager is. So one of the things that they don't want to be feeling like is though they're treated like everybody else. As Adam said, individuality is very important to them. Money might be tight, so for them being social and being with friends and hanging out is really important. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be spending a ton of money while doing that. It's really about the experience. They're huge multitaskers, so they're online a lot, but they're doing that while they're doing their homework, while they're listening to music, while they're watching TV. So we need to think about the online channel as a space to reach them, but also think about the fact that they're multitasking while they're on there. They're also overwhelmed. They've got a lot going on. They've got school, they've got their extracurriculars, their friends, their dating. They feel very busy and they feel stressed. And sometimes they don't necessarily, like their parents, really get that. So as Adam said earlier, they do have good relationships with their parents, but they don't always feel as though their parents totally understand the amount of stress that they're under. So given all of this, when we talk about smoking with them, they really feel like, what's the big deal? I've got all these other things that I'm worried about. People aren't really doing this, so why are you even talking to me about it? And furthermore, if one of their friends is doing it, they don't really think about it as a problem for them. That's their choice. That's their friend's choice. That's not their choice. So there's nothing I can do to impact the decision that they're making. And then finally, they don't like to be seen as shallow. For them, making a difference is important, and this sort of generalization that teenagers are superficial and so concerned with trends and money and all this sort of thing is really is not appealing to them and not how they want to self-identify. So, as an example, they're not just buying Tom shoes because they're cute. They're buying them because they really do make an impact. When we looked at the messaging, we saw some interesting things. The health messaging that's out there right now, while very compelling and has a lot of stopping power and shock value, it doesn't necessarily speak to teenagers because the imagery that you're seeing, we're not seeing pictures of teens. The health issues that these folks are facing are not things that teens see in their immediate future. These are things that happen to grandma. These are things that maybe happen to mom or to dad, but not to me. So there's a disconnect there. Yes, it has stopping power and has shock value, but it's not really speaking directly to teenagers. Then the whole industry manipulation piece that we saw as part of the Truth campaign 10, 15 years ago, that was very compelling because this idea that big tobacco was specifically targeting teenagers was very much true. Now, because of regulation, this just isn't the case. So this whole message that Truth brought forward really isn't, it isn't going to resonate with this audience anymore. So what do we want to do? We want to tap into this 81%, these teenagers that are not current smokers, by assuring them that their actions in fact really do matter. And how we want to do this is by making a clear link between reducing tobacco and the other things that are important to them. Specifically, we want to give them the recognition that they seek and that they really deserve. We want to give them immediate and long-term rewards to give them that recognition and encourage them to stay involved in the effort and to get involved in the effort. And finally, we want to elevate this issue to something bigger. We want to make it a cause that their generation can really own and win. So, we could see this coming to life in a lot of different ways, and that's certainly something we would want to explore with you in more detail. But some of the ideas that we had, just off the top of our head, we could see a huge Facebook campaign here. A lot of social media could come into play with these teenagers where they're actually joining a group to show that they aren't smoking. We could see a lot of partnerships with brands that they love and respect, places like Apple, Pepsi, that type of thing, where they're actually getting rewards for being a part of this effort. So you can see that this would play out in a lot of different ways, but it's got a really new and modern feel.
And scene. Okay, so that is an example of 9 slides that you can use to take information, tell a story, and develop a strategy. It's important to, there are a couple things that Eric and I want to talk a little bit about, because obviously this is a little bit different than the challenge that you have. But that's okay, and we're going to talk about some of those differences. First, this is not, this presentation, is not designed to be cookie cutter, that you need to have exactly these slides doing exactly the same thing. One of the main examples of that is we have qualitative. You're not going to have focus group data most likely in your effort, and that's fine. But it does allow for, in that gap, to maybe pull some more of the messaging elements that you get, maybe some more environmental scan elements that you understood, or blow out the audience profile piece a little bit more than we did. All of that is fine, but it's important to understand that you're taking pieces from all these different slides to ladder up.
Yep, exactly. And a couple other things I would add there is don't feel like the strategy that we presented here is necessarily the strongest one. This is just to give you an example of how you can take a whole host of data and come up with something based off of your measurable objectives that would be a strategy that could hypothetically help you to meet that. And so I wouldn't get overly hung up on, is this necessarily the right strategy, but is this strategy based in data, based on the objectives that you've laid out? As much as that's what you have to work with, and that's really what we did here as well.
Yep, exactly. There are a lot of key points, a lot of trigger words that we've talked about throughout the semester. They were all in here so that you were building up to that final strategy. Now, we'll also note that we did not show you the reference slide, but it's something that you're going to need to have with your presentation, so don't feel that that's gone away in any stretch of the imagination either. It is part of the assignment, but we did try to stick to the rubric. Where we did deviate a little bit from the presentation suggestions and notes that we posted up, we do have a couple of slides that probably had more words than many presentations should, but as we're designing the audience, that's a decision that Erica and I made in developing the presentation. We thought that would help the viewer. Again, you are free to do what you think is best in order to communicate the important information and bring all of us along your ride to get to your final strategy.
And then one last thing would just be, you don't have to identify tactics. As you saw in the presentation, I sort of started to show a little leg in that regard. But, as you probably recall from our initial presentation, I think it was during week 1 when we talk about how we define a strategy, one of the things you can use to sort of test whether or not your strategy has some legs is to see if you're able to easily brainstorm and generate some tactics that would freely flow from that. So, again, don't feel like you need to go through and outline a bunch of tactics that would stem from your strategy, but maybe as you're developing your strategy, it might be a nice way to test whether or not you feel like it's really working for you.
That's about it. We hope you have a great Thanksgiving. We very much look forward to seeing these presentations. You'll see an email over the next couple of days in terms of the time slots that we've been able to lock down for each team. But again, we're looking forward to the end of the semester, and thanks again.